In this video, we're going to show you how to install the engine oil pan on your Jeep Grand Cherokee located on the bottom side of your engine. Now on the passenger side of the engine, we have our exhaust manifold coming down right here. There are two 50mm bolts that go through the flange and up into the flange on the exhaust manifold. We're going to run our 50mm swivel socket and extension up between the exhaust and the oil pan in front of the starter and get that onto that rear bolt. I want to see if we can loosen that. We did spray this down liberally with some rust penetrant. And the retaining tab for the nut has broken off due to rust. So we're going to switch over to the front bolt here and see if we can loosen this one. On the driver's side, we'll try and loosen this bolt here. Try the back bolt. All of the nut retainers were so rusted they just broke off. So at this point here, we're going to have to cut those studs out, which is a nut and bolt application, so it'll be easy to replace. In your case here, you want to try and find something to cut those studs out if the same thing happened. If that didn't happen, then your bolts would have come out and the nuts would have had the retaining tabs on the back side, making them reusable. Using our 15mm swivel socket and extension, we're going to go ahead, loosen and remove these two nuts holding the center pipe hanger here for the exhaust. Now we're going to wiggle that exhaust and see if we can get that flange off of here. Let's go ahead and lower this down. And now we can slide this back. See how we disconnected that mid-mount hanger? And that gives us about 4 inches or so to go ahead and continue to work here. On the bottom side of the engine, we're going to find this bracket right here. It is actually between the oil pan and the transmission. And there's a series of 15mm bolts that hold us in place. There's 2 here, there's 1 here, there's 2 across the back, and then we have a couple more on the other side. So you're going to use a series of deep socket and extensions to go ahead and get in there and loosen and remove these bolts. Now our transmission lines do have to move out of the way so we can access a couple other bolts on that bracket. And right here there's a plastic retainer that usually slides up onto or attaches to one of the oil pan bolts. Well, the plastic retainer is broken, so there is a wire tie or some sort of securing strap here. We're going to cut that. And we need to go ahead and pull this down. Now when it comes time to access the bolts vertically going up, we have our transmission lines here. I'm going to use a small pry bar and just gently apply some pressure. And you can see that it gives you immediate access to those bolts right there. So we're just going to gently pry that over and put our extension socket on there and zip those bolts out. Let's go ahead and remove our last bolt here. Now we're going to use our pry bar to go ahead and gently rock this mounting plate off. Ours is kind of stuck on there because of the aluminum corrosion. So once we have those bolts out, we should be able to drop this bracket down and out. Moving our transmission lines out of the way a little bit, we'll have to use our pry bar again, just to shift those lines just a little bit. Alright, we'll remove that bracket and set it aside. We're going to remove our drain plug here on our oil pan using a 13mm socket. Get that oil drained out. I'm going to go ahead and throw in our drain plug. Just gently snug that. And then we'll just wipe off that little oil drip. Around the perimeter of the oil pan, there's going to be a series of 10mm bolts. We're going to use an extension and 10mm socket. And go ahead and start to loosen and remove these. Then with the bolts removed, we're going to use our mallet here and go ahead, give this a few bonks, see if we can separate it from the engine. If that doesn't work, you can use a pry bar. I'm going to gently tap that in on the edge. Now when pulling this out, there is a heavy gasket inside here that is also part of a splash shield on the inside. When replacing the oil pan, you definitely want to go ahead and make plans to replace the oil pan gasket with that splash shield as well. Now with the oil pan dropped, we're going to try and shift the exhaust back. And hopefully we can maneuver this pan out just by shifting the exhaust back and forth and wiggling this out. Now by pushing up on the exhaust, the pan drops down and you can go ahead and remove that. In order to remove our oil pan gasket and a windage tray here, we have to remove our oil pickup tube. Now there's going to be three 12mm nuts securing this to the engine itself. There's one right here. We're going to use our extension and socket. Go ahead and remove that. There's one a little bit further up on the passenger side. And then there's one on the front side here, right by the front portion of the crankshaft. And this one here is a bolt. Now I'm going to grab our oil pickup tube and give that a little wiggle. And on the front side, it's pressed in a little bit and there's a rubber O-ring seal. And then we have our catch can underneath. A little bit of oil is going to come out of that oil pickup tube. Go ahead and remove this. Now on the oil pickup tube, there is an O-ring right here. You definitely want to go ahead and replace this O-ring before we reinstall it. Now we can go ahead and grab the pan gasket and the windage tray. Go ahead and separate that from the block. On the bottom side of the engine here where the gasket goes, you want to go ahead and use some spray solvent and some rags. Clean around the whole bottom here where that new gasket is going to go. Make sure it's clean from any defects or any old gasket material. And once that's done, we'll go ahead and reinstall our oil pickup tube and our gasket. On our oil pickup tube, go ahead and replace that O-ring. I'm just going to use a pick, get underneath and just work that up and off. Give that a quick wipe down. Very important, you want to inspect this here, make sure there's no cracks or any damage to this here. This is very important to the operation of the vehicle. Take your new O-ring, roll that on over, and push that down. Let's go ahead and feed our pan gasket up into place. Now with our pan gasket in place, it'll just naturally want to fall down. I'm going to take one of the nuts here and I'm just going to throw that on there just to hold that in place. Let's go ahead and get our oil pickup tube and get that installed. We're going to feed our oil pickup tube up into the engine here. Get our bolt lined up. I just want to get that bolt started a few threads. I'm going to remove that nut holding that pan. And let's get our back half of the oil pickup tube lined up. And with all the hardware installed, I'm just going to go ahead and run all these in by hand. And then we'll come back and snug them all down. Now we snug down those nuts and bolts just a tiny bit. I want to make sure that our pan gasket is still loose. At this point, what we're going to do is we're going to install 4 pan bolts. There's going to be 2 on the front and 2 on the back. What this is going to do is line up our pan gasket before we tighten down our oil pickup tube, because if we tighten that down now and the bolt holes don't line up with the pan gasket, it's not going to install. We're going to have to tear it all apart again. So this is a crucial part of installation. Make sure you don't miss this. Okay, we have 4 bolts in. Next thing we want to do is we're going to go ahead and torque down our nuts and bolt to 20 foot-pounds. Starting with the bolt at the forward side of the engine here, you want to go ahead and torque this down first, and then we'll work our way back. Remove the 4 bolts lining up the oil pan gasket. Go ahead and feed your oil pan up into place. Now that we have our pan up in place, we're going to grab our extension with one of the bolts. With one hand, hold the pan with the other. And we're going to go ahead and feed this up. I'm going to grab one of the front bolts because that's going to be the easiest one for me right now. Get that started, a few threads. And then I'm going to grab another bolt. I'm going to go right to the back of the oil pan. And I'm going to get any one of the back ones that I can installed. At this point here, I'm going to go ahead and install the rest of the bolts. Now there's one stud style bolt that goes right where the transmission retainer clip goes. So you'll have to move that line out of the way a little bit in order to get that in there. And the rest are all standard bolts. Let's go ahead and get those installed. Now some of these bolts here, it's easy just to get them started by hand to get that right angle just right on there. Now we have them all in. We just want to go around and snug these all down. Don't want to over tighten them. We just want them to be snug and seated at this point. We'll come back and torque them after that. They're all snug down. Let's go come back and torque them next. Now each one of these bolts has to get tightened down in a particular pattern. Now on the middle of the pan, it's going to start with number 1 over here, and I'm just using a crayon. It's going to be number 2 over here. And then it's going to go back to the passenger side, and the next bolt back will be 3. And it comes back over here to 4. Then it will come back up here to 5. It'll be 6. And then we're going to come back to the rear of the pan. There'll be 7 over here. 8 will jump over to the other side over here. 9 goes to the front of the pan right here. Be 9 here. It's going to jump over to 10. Now we're going to go back to the back of the oil pan. On the back passenger side, this corner one up here will be 11. It's going to go to 12 on the back side here. And we're going to jump all the way to the front of the pan. This corner one right here will be 13. It'll be 14 on this corner here. Back to the rear. The bolt right up here, just diagonal from our drain plug, that'll be 15. And then 16 will be over here. And then we're going to finish up with the last 2 on the front. It'll be 17 and 18. Now let's go ahead and torque these bolts down. And we're going to torque these to 11 foot-pounds. We'll put our bracket in here. Work this up into position. Have to move our transmission lines a little bit. And now that we have that up there, let's go ahead and get a couple of the bolts installed here just to lock this into place. Now I'm going to get this bolt started by hand, and I'm going to go over to the driver's side, and I'm going to get a bolt started over there. That'll hold this bracket in place, and then we'll finish installing the rest of the bolts. Now, installing a bracket here, the key thing here is to install the 4 upper bolts going up. We already got the ones in on the driver's side, and you want to go ahead and make sure that these are good and tight. Now, the reason why you want to make sure that these upper 4 ones are in nice and tight is that now you can install the horizontal bolt here and tighten this one down. Now with this bolt installed, it makes it hard to get to that upper bolt to tighten that properly without that socket being crooked. You don't want to damage or round off that bolt when doing so. But this allows you to go ahead and get our horizontal bolts installed here, the passenger side, and then the 2 across the bottom here as well. On the back side here, we have our exhaust hanger. I want to go ahead and get that pushed back into place. Once we have that hanging on the studs, we'll go ahead and install the nuts. On our particular vehicle, there is a ground strap on this here. Yours may or may not have that. Once you have those started, you can go ahead and tighten those down. Now we have our exhaust flange lined up with our manifold. Let's push our flange up to the exhaust manifold. And we had to source new bolts in order to assemble this because ours were in bad shape and we had to cut them out. Once we have these 2 in here, we're going to go ahead and install the 2 bolts on the passenger side. Once you have the 2 bolts in on one side, go ahead and repeat for the other side. Now that we have all of our exhaust manifold flange bolts installed, we want to go ahead and tighten those down evenly. Making sure that the nuts and the bolts are pretty much the same length when you're securing these here and that flange is even. And once you're done with this side here, we're going to repeat for the other side. Underneath the hood here, you're going to come on over to the passenger side rear and locate the oil dipstick. Go ahead and pull that out. As you're pulling that out, go ahead and give it a wipe and set that aside. On the front side of the passenger side right here, you're going to locate the oil engine fill cap right here. Go ahead and spin that off. Set that aside. Once you have the cap off, reach down inside and go ahead and pull this out. Now, if you want to use a funnel, that's great. This is plenty large enough to go ahead and start pouring oil in, but just to be safe, go ahead and throw a funnel in there if you want. Now, this engine takes 6 quarts of oil. Go ahead and make sure you have the correct type of oil that is going into the engine. I'm going to go ahead and start it up. Let it run for about 30 seconds or so, and then shut it down. I'll go ahead and check that oil again. Go ahead and remove that funnel. Pop that in and put your cap on. Make sure that's locked down. You're going to take your freshly wiped dipstick, slide that into the dipstick tube. Let's go ahead and start up the vehicle. Let it run for about 30 seconds. Then you're going to come on back, pull that out, and check the level. Go ahead and pull this out. Now, before we go ahead and check the initial level, you want to go ahead and give this a wipe because the oil has been splashed around a little bit. I'm going to wipe this down clean, let the oil settle to the bottom of that pan again, and then feed this in. Bottom that out, and then pull it back out. Let's go ahead and check that level. Right here, we have an add line, and then we have a safe space. It's roughly about 1 inch or so. You want to make sure that the oil level is inside that safe space. If it is, perfect. If you're at the add, you want to go ahead and add at least a half a quart. See where you're at that point there. Do not overfill. Very, very important. We're in a good safe zone. Let's go ahead and install that there. And you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.